You know that moment. Someone's voice gets sharper, not even screaming necessarily, just louder, harder, more pointed, and in a matter of seconds, something inside you completely changes. Your mind goes blank, your chest tightens, your throat closes up, the words you had a second ago vanish. Maybe you nod, maybe you stare at the floor, maybe you suddenly feel like a child in an adult body standing there with no idea how to defend yourself, even though later you will think of 10 perfect things you could have said. But in the moment, you do not fight. You do not argue. You just go quiet. If that feels painfully familiar, stay with me, because the psychology of people who shut down when someone raises their voice is not about weakness or a bad personality for conflict. It is often your nervous system doing something very intelligent, very old, and very misunderstood. Once you understand what your body is trying to do in those moments, the shame around it starts to loosen. Most people think conflict is purely emotional. Someone gets upset, someone reacts. But for some people, conflict is physical. The raised voice does not stay in the room as sound. It enters the body like danger, changing breathing, muscle tension, and even language retrieval. That is why people who shut down often feel confused afterward. They know they had thoughts and that they cared, but in the actual moment, the system that normally helps them speak simply stopped cooperating. And here's where it gets interesting. When someone raises their voice at you, your brain is not always asking what argument is happening. Sometimes it is asking something much older. Am I safe right now? That question happens so quickly, you do not experience it as a sentence. You just feel the result. Freeze. Silence. Collapse inward. Psychologists often talk about fight and flight, but there is another response that matters just as much, and for a lot of people, matters more. Freeze. The psychiatrist, Stephen Porges, whose work on polyvagal theory reshaped how trauma researchers understand the nervous system, describes freeze as an ancient survival circuit that activates when fighting or fleeing are not options. Your system decides that arguing will not help and escaping is not possible, so the safest move is to become smaller, quieter, less visible. That response can look passive from the outside. It is not passive at all. It is survival logic. And before anyone in the comments jumps in with just stand up for yourself, let's be honest about something. That advice only makes sense if your body still feels like it is in a normal conversation. If your nervous system has already classified the moment as threat, just speak up is about as useful as telling someone underwater to simply breathe normally. The system has already changed states. This pattern usually has roots older than the current argument. A lot of people who go quiet learned early that loudness meant unpredictability and rising tension, whether that came from a loud household, harsh criticism, or years of walking on eggshells without ever naming it. What matters is not how dramatic your childhood looked from outside. What matters is what your nervous system learned to associate with volume. If loud voices once led to humiliation, blame, or emotional withdrawal, your body remembers that even when your adult mind does not consciously think about it. Years later, someone raises their voice in a meeting or a relationship, and your body does not respond to the current moment alone. It responds to the entire archive. And here's the kicker. There are different kinds of people who shut down when voices get loud, and they are not all shutting down for the same reason. The first type is the threatened child response. This person becomes small fast. They may feel tears rising even while trying not to. Their body reads the raised voice as emotional danger and collapses into protection. This is the person who later feels embarrassed because they know, logically, that the other person was not going to physically hurt them. But the body was not using logic. It was using memory. The second type is the overload response. This person is not necessarily afraid of the other person. They are overwhelmed by the intensity itself. The louder the voice gets, the less their brain can organize thoughts until their working memory fails under pressure and the whole system lags. Their silence is not surrender. It is overload. The third type is the conflict-conditioned peacemaker. This person learned early that the safest way to survive somebody else's intensity was to become the non-problem. They do not just go quiet because they are scared. They go quiet because some deep part of them believes that if they stay calm and agreeable enough, the storm will pass faster. These are often the same people who apologize too quickly and replay arguments for hours afterward. So how do you know which one you are? A clue is what happens after the moment ends. Shaky, ashamed, and strangely young points to the threatened child response. Foggy and unable to think clearly points to overload. If your first instinct is to repair the other person's mood before asking whether you are okay, that is the peacemaker pattern. All three share one painful feature. They make people feel weak for something that was actually adaptive. Many people spend years hating themselves for shutting down, without realizing it was once a brilliant strategy that kept them from escalating an unsafe situation, or from saying something that would be used against them. The problem was never that your body learned that strategy. The problem is that it kept using it long after the original environment was gone. There is another layer people rarely talk about. Tone often hits harder than words. Someone can tolerate calm criticism just fine, but what knocks them out is the sharpness, the contempt leaking through the sound. That is why people who shut down often feel confused when someone says, "I was only telling the truth." The issue was never the content. It was the meaning their nervous system heard in the tone. Later, once the moment has passed, that same person usually starts having the conversation internally, replaying the scene and building the clearer argument they could not access before. That is not new intelligence arriving. It was there the whole time. It was simply unavailable while the alarm was on. Shutting down when someone raises their voice does not mean you are bad at conflict. It means your body has a history with intensity, and those are two very different stories. One says, "I am pathetic, I cannot handle basic confrontation." The other says, "My nervous system learned to prioritize survival over performance, and now it sometimes overprotects me." The first story creates shame. The second creates understanding, and understanding is what actually gives you room to change. None of this means every shutdown is healthy. It can damage relationships and attract people who mistake silence for compliance. But fixing it only at the level of communication skills usually hits a wall, because a script does not help if your nervous system still hears danger in a raised voice. The real work is teaching your body slowly that a louder tone does not automatically mean abandonment, and that you can stay present in intensity without leaving your own body. That takes practice, gentleness, and dropping the idea that you are broken for reacting the way you do. Let me slow down for this next part because it matters. If you go quiet when voices get loud, the goal is not to become hard or to tolerate endless disrespect without flinching. The goal is to stay connected to yourself long enough to recognize what is happening and choose what comes next. Sometimes that choice is to speak. Sometimes it is to leave. Sometimes it is simply to say, "I can talk about this, but not like this." That is not weakness. That is regulation. If this has quietly followed you through family arguments, relationships, and moments at work, even times when part of you knew the other person was wrong and your body still folded inward anyway, that pattern deserves to be named clearly. Your silence in those moments never meant you had nothing inside you. It meant your system decided long ago that being loud was dangerous and being small was smart. Maybe that strategy saved you once. But maybe you are finally in a season of life where you do not need to disappear every time the room gets louder. If any of this resonated with you, that recognition is worth more than it feels like right now. If this is the first video of mine you have watched, subscribing costs you nothing, and a like helps this channel keep making more like it.